On this episode of Anti-Aging Hacks, we discuss how injuries or bad posture can cause pain in your body, how to fix your posture and live free of chronic pain. As a plus, our guest even teaches you how to lose the weight from the waist down. Welcome to Anti-Aging Hacks. On this podcast, I interview top experts in anti-aging and longevity, and we discuss the best natural and medical solutions to bring you practical advice you can apply right now to fight back against aging. We also discuss sneak peeks at some huge scientific advancements coming in the near future that will allow us to age backwards. I am your host, Faraz Khan. Thank you for spending some time with me today. Today, my guest is Brian Bradley. He's just a Jedi at helping you get rid of chronic pain and resetting your body's natural alignment. He has done a lot of work with major celebrities and athletes on teaching them how to move their bodies. I regard his work very highly, as having an aligned posture is key to staying pain-free and living a long life. Brian, welcome to the show. I want to start by telling our listeners what the Egoscue method is and why is it called Egoscue of all things?
Well, that's a great question, and thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to, contribute and serve any way we can. I'm real big into that, so sharing this kind of information is a lot of fun, so thanks for the opportunity. The Egoscue method, and that's Egoscue, E-G-O-S-C-U-E, and just let your listeners know they're not going to be tested on pronunciation or spelling because it takes a while. But it's a gentleman named Pete Egoscue. It's named after his last name, and it right around 1971 was the inception of the actual company and the thought process behind it, because that's when Pete Egoscue first realized, after his injuries in the Vietnam conflict, the Vietnam War, whatever you want to call it, his injuries were sustained to his left hip, left leg, left knee, left lower back in combat. And he looked at things and said, look, I'm doing all these treatment protocols. I'm not feeling any better. What's the reason? I know these very talented MDs, therapists, and all that. He wasn't like down on anybody. It was more like they're doing their best, but he's a Marine and he wants to be at next level performance, and his body wasn't just falling into line like it normally should. So he started asking questions: why, what, when, how, and always going back to why. So if the back hurts, why? Well, because your hip is out of alignment. Why? Well, because you had that injury. Okay, I get that, but why isn't my body healing? So he kept the underlying premise that he would keep going to all these visits with was why? And he came to a self-discovery when he picked up Gray's Anatomy, which if you've ever looked at an anatomy book, it's not the easiest to memorize or recognize any of the black and white hand drawings and things in there. It's not the easiest place you'd send your kid if you were saying become an anatomist. But that's what he had back in the early 70s and 80s. And he started studying this. And finally, in around 1971, it hit him. Wow, this is my job to fix this. I have to contribute something to the medical world and stop the stressor that I'm giving them based on them trying to, quote, fix me. I have to do my part. And the method was born. And that's when he started working on himself. And he found a pain-free solution by a guy who has zero medical training. Opened up the doors for all of this training that you know as corrective exercise and functional medicine. Now that you see the word functional being thrown around left and right, Pete Egoscue basically is the grandfather of functional movement and the grandfather of, or the godfather of posture, because we look at this kind of stuff from the whole body as a unit. And me coming out of university training, typical athletic trainer exercise physiology, I looked at things in parts. And I knew the body worked as a whole. This was back in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, and saying, but there's got to be more. And that's when I hooked up with Pete in the early 90s and forever changed the way that I look at the human body.
Got it. First of all, I thought Gray's Anatomy was a TV show, not an actual book, but thank you for educating me on that. What is your background? How did you come into meeting Pete Egoscue, and how did you get involved or decide to go along with Egoscue?
Well, the cool part is in the early 90s, I had moved from the great state of Pennsylvania to Florida and thought it was amazing because no more snow, right? So you move down to Florida and all you deal with is showering 3 times a day in the humidity. And I finally ran into a gentleman who I was working with, this physical therapist, and he said, look, I just came from an interview at this place. you might want to look at this. They're looking more down the physiology world than they are the therapy world. So I went over and talked to the therapist who was there. And I said, look, this is what I do with the Biodex testing and the Cybex testing and all this old school stuff we did in the 90s. And it was all about gathering metrics, and here's where your knee bend is after an ACL reconstruction, and here's how much extension you have. And everything was focused on the knee itself, if that's where the injury was. Not really looking at it that the knee is bookended by the ankle and the hip. And by the way, the shoulders and mid-back have everything to do with freeing up and getting the functional movement patterns back at the hip, which when I ran into Pete Egoscue in 1991, it changed everything. And from that standpoint, I quit looking at the body in parts. And I was on board for about 90 days. And then one of the therapists said, you're not really getting this the way that I want you to. So he took my meathead built body, because that's all I was doing then was weightlifting and not really being a quote athlete anymore. And I was becoming bigger, faster, tighter, bigger, faster, tighter, bigger, slower, tighter, and wondering why my back hurt when I would lay down on my stomach. When I would go to bed, I'm like, wow, I'm only 20 some years young. Why is my back hurt? And when I finally had some dumbbells put in my hand and weight trained one exercise correctly, it forever changed the way that I look at things. And as, what you're experiencing with Egoscue, the same kind of idea, like just little movements during the global movement of your body can forever change what's either fired or not fired. And that's what critically got me to think differently, because now it's never about symptom. It's always about cause, which is a really fun place to be.
Yeah, I agree. It's been a bit of life-changing for me in that just learning from you and the Egoscue method before, and I'll get into some of the injuries I've had, but when I went to my shoulder physical therapy guy, we just worked on my shoulder for a few weeks, and I thought I was good, but I wasn't. And just spending some time with you and getting to know you, I've realized that the shoulder impacts a lot of things in the body, and if you can correct them, then it really makes a systemic change where you're going after the symptom or the cause, not the symptom.
Well, here's the fun part. What if I told you, and your listeners will love this too, what if your injury site, as long as it's not acute, like you hit a mountain bike into a tree at 60 miles an hour, you're going to have contusions. I'm talking about, hey, my shoulders don't move the way they used to. My biceps hurting me, my shoulders hurting me. What if we said that's a good thing? It's a signal. Congratulations, you tore your rotator cuff. Now you're at least motivated to find out why you tore your rotator cuff. Yeah, we're going to go after the cause, which is the global macro look at how the arm bone meets the shoulder blade, meets the clavicle or collarbone. So those three work together to form that shoulder. And when one of them becomes incongruent or quits moving, most likely the shoulder blade based on the spine being out of position, then we can go at the whole body, and you can look at changing foot and knee position and actually affect the shoulder, which is a pretty cool thing to do, especially when a customer is dumbfounded by no solutions, over the past 2 years.
Mm-hmm. No, that's pretty cool. So do people come to you, Brian, because they're dealing with an injury and they're not finding that they're healing fast enough for their body's going back to what it was? Or are they coming to you for, I want to improve myself and even better than where I'm at right now?
Both, but I will tell you, pain is the number one motivator for people to find us. So people ask me all the time, are you insurance-based? And I said, no, that's why it works. And they get a good chuckle out of it. Yeah, like you just chuckled, but it's very true. When you're not caught up in the typical allopathic medicine treating symptoms, and you're allowed to globally look at the entire body and just create different functional movement, then that's a whole different story to talk about. And back in the early 90s when Pete and I were talking about this, I said, you don't realize there's only so much of you to go around. And there's definitely only so much of me to go around. Neither one of us have the bandwidth to quote, save the world, no matter how many clinics we have. The idea was to empower the customer to look at the pain-free book series, go to a clinic, do the digital therapy options that we have. No is not even an option for us. I had a customer come into my Del Mar clinic yesterday, and she said, I have so many things going on. Do you take insurance? We said, no, blah, blah, blah. Here's the pricing. Well, I just can't afford that. I'm like, well, what can you afford? And she's like, well, I can't afford to be in pain. And I said, I know that, but what can you afford? Because I have a book in the library that you can go get for free. Can you afford that? Yes. Go get the book. Start there. Our job is to create Egoscue zealots out there. And a lot of them come here for performance. A lot of our professional tennis, golf, football, baseball, soccer, whatever it might be, they're all the same to me. And whether they're making $100 million a year or they're making $10,000 a year, they deserve an ability and a choice to live pain-free. And that's what we're trying to give them, is life without limitations.
Yeah. And one of the things I've learned from you, and certainly reading the book a little bit more this last weekend, was when we get into a situation where we have an injury or we just doing the movements in life a wrong way, the primary muscles that are supposed to be engaging or working stop engaging or working a certain way. This leads to another muscle compensating for the primary muscle, which is now making that other muscle stronger, and it just keeps going. What are the downsides of this, the compensation?
Well, the compensations, that's why I told you before about congratulations, you have scoliosis or rotator cuff tear or low back injuries. I would say congratulations to this compensation too. The compensation should be congratulated and thanked, because the compensation's trying to right or correct your body. Mm-hmm. So think about, hey, I can't move my right shoulder. My trap and my shoulder are so tight. Ask why it's tight instead of rolling it out or massaging it out or lasering it out. Yes, that may symptomatically make you feel better, but you're trying to turn off a switch that's being turned on every day because of the compensation being part of a pattern to make up for what the hip is not doing. So, me, I focus on really one muscle, and it's the psoas. Yep. And if we can wake that up, let it be the turn on switch, the circuit breaker for your core to take over, then this whole idea of, well, your glutes have amnesia, your core is weak, your upper back is too tight, your traps are too dominant, blah, 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 you can't swing a golf club. Mm-hmm. It really comes down to realign the hip musculature, turn the psoas back on, and then the glute amnesia automatically goes away. Meaning your glutes don't work, never asking why don't they work. Mm-hmm. Instead of strengthening it, ask why it doesn't work, which is another form of compensation.
Okay. Do you have a different word for the psoas muscle?
Yeah, the king.
The king.
So it's known as the hip flexor, the primary hip flexor, but it's not real efficient at what you call hip flexing, the psoas itself. The iliacus is amazing at helping out with that. And, the rectus femoris and the sartorius and all these big muscles that nobody's going to be tested on. But those are just groups of muscles that work together. Nothing works by itself. But I can tell you this much, they shut off by themselves. They compensatedly shut off neurologically. So if Faraz, if you were to sprain your ankle and your assumption is I have an ankle injury, right away I say, well, now you have an opposite shoulder problem compensation, and you have the same side hip that's creating that. So we've got to turn the hip neurologically back on to stop the shoulder from doing all the work, or that ankle's never going to be 100%, or secondarily, it's going to show up as a back injury. And then you think you have a bad back when really it was the catalyst at the ankle, the injury there, the noxious movement that caused the injury in the first place. So you got to wake up the king, which is the psoas.
I was a soccer player my whole life, so I've definitely had my fair share of ankle sprains. But before we get into that, I do have to comment that I read the book this last weekend, and I learned so much more just from all the detail that's in there. And, while I was reading the book, I had to do a double take because I recognized, and the pictures aren't very sharp or very close up, but I recognized pictures of you back from, I believe it's the early 90s. And so it's a younger, studlier version of yourself. You've got the slick back hair all the way back. I do have to call you out, though, on your shiny track pants. Man, those were so 90s. What were you thinking?
It's not that I was thinking, it's that I wasn't thinking. And you got to remember, MC Hammer was my mentor. No, I'm just kidding you. I cannot dance like that at all. And for those, everybody's Googling who's real young now going, who's MC Hammer? What?
Yeah.
But if you didn't, I always tell people, you've heard me at the Tony Robbins stuff. If you didn't live in the 80s, then you didn't live. But if you didn't live in the 90s, you probably got lucky because some of the music and stuff like that wasn't real good. And the dress was something to be left back in the 90s.
Yeah. So speaking of Tony Robbins, that's where I first met you. And it was very interesting. The first time I saw you on stage, man, you were moving, I think it was 13 or 15,000 people in unison at the same time. And I remember that one exercise you were doing. I believe it's the abdominal exercise where you go ear to your abdomen and you go back and forth with both hands really fast. And the entire audience was just going crazy. And I was looking left and right, and I was getting fatigued. And I'm an athlete. How am I getting fatigued? And there were people of all walks of life, all ages, just doing it and loving it. That was really a sight to behold, by the way.
Well, I'll try to get a link for you to put up so people can see it. We call it the greatest abdominal exercise ever. And I called Tony Horton from P90X. We were talking about doing a thing together. And I said to him, I said, by the way, I use what you call the, I don't know, sprinting or running or whatever it's called. In the clinics, we called it the Running Man. But I aptly changed the name to the greatest abdominal exercise ever because it fires your abdominal wall and your back wall and turns on the hip flexor like nobody's business. And it's the perturbance of the arms going from your cheek on your face to the cheek on your butt with a 90-degree angle, sprinting as fast as you can. And, next time we do the podcast, we'll do some video stuff that people can actually play along with. But I will tell you, it's an amazing thing to watch, 15,000 people do that. And the Guinness World Book of Records just doesn't know that was the largest fitness class ever taught in the world. I didn't want to bother them because they seem so busy, with the world's tallest man and things like that. But I will tell you, Faraz, you're exactly right. You looked around at it as a young athletic male and went, wait a second. That person is in their 50s. That person's 250 pounds overweight. That person is this. There's a 9-year-old Brian has on stage. That's why I bring young kids up on stage to motivate the crowd to go, even a 9-year-old is doing this. Can we actually pick up the pace a little bit?
Oh man, instant. I can obviously testify to that. I've done it one or two times in the crowd. Now, just speaking of you and how you deal with people, it's very, very interesting to me because when people approach you, it's almost like you're seeing them in a 3D X-ray, dude. Like people come up to you and you're like, oh, got it. You can already sense or you have an idea of where they might have issues or pain. And there's crowds of people surrounding you. Like I have to fight my way to shake your hand sometimes. It's you definitely had a way with people. So good job on that.
Well, I got lucky. 26 years ago, I ran into, almost 27 years ago now, working with Tony Robbins because Pete Egoscue and Tony were friends. And Tony was my first client that I got to basically spend a lot of time with. And watching those two communicate with each other all through thick and thin in their lives, Tony coming in for therapy, they'd always sit down for an hour and shoot the breeze for a little bit to find out, what each other's doing in business and where they're going in life. And to watch both of them, I'm only 51. Those guys are, Tony's almost 60, which we can't tell him I said almost 60 because he's not 60 yet. But he's, right. The guy's like a teenager running around on stage. And Pete's in his mid 70s, young. And to see what he's doing longevity wise is unbelievable. But it's kind of fun to watch both of those guys. So I luckily have had some serious examples in front of me of what to do in my life physiologically and mentally and emotionally. And to be able to listen, I told Pete one time on the phone, when you truly understand the Egoscue method, it's like you have a third eye in the middle of your forehead that can see and hear things that a lot of people can't. And it's not like a specialty like you have a superpower. It's honestly that you're open to seeing and listening to people differently.
Yeah. No, I can definitely see that, and you definitely want to help people. Now, speaking of Tony Robbins, I know that he's working with the best of the best in everything. That guy's a machine, as you know, just runs around for 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 days at a time. It's equivalent of running marathons every day, but he's definitely getting the best help from the best of the best in the world. So again, that puts you in elite company there. Question I had on the Egoscue exercises, and I want to come back to longevity because that is the gist of my podcast, obviously. But some of these exercises with Egoscue do look similar to yoga. Was that an inspiration to Pete?
I think it just came out of his research into what movements actually make you feel better. So we've never actually sat down and had him say, I was inspired by yoga. But when I started in the 90s, I remember cats and dogs, which is cat-cow, which I still don't understand how cats and cows are living together. It should be cats and dogs. And then the down dog, the full cobra to the elbow cobra to, which we have, versions of each one of these that we've changed and improved for our needs, not that they're improvements over something that was broken.
So I just want to give the listeners a little bit of my background. I've been into sports my entire life. I was a college athlete and played soccer for my college. When I was about 19, I was riding a motorbike really fast, and there's a couple of us, and we were just fooling around in the side streets, and we were coming at it from opposite directions, and somehow we ran into each other, and I flew over the other motorbike, and I think I injured my right shoulder, but the shin was bleeding, so I was like, oh, it's all about the shin. Had to go to the hospital, take care of the shin. Never looked at my shoulder, which I think that's where it started. At some point, I went skydiving, had other soccer injuries, and even in skydiving, when that chute opens, man, you go from going 120 miles an hour downwards to it seems like 5 miles an hour upwards. It's like a huge shift in your velocity. After that, I had a little chunk of, I think, a little piece of bone in my shoulder that was misplaced, so that they did an orthopedic scope, took it out of there. Since then, I've had bad sleep posture. I tend to sleep on my sides, and I don't do it very well, and I curl up in a weird fetal position. And then just sitting posture, right? It's non-functional. You just sit there, your head's down because you're looking at the cell phone or you're typing on the computer. Weightlifting, I've been throwing weights around my entire 20s and my early 30s. Just the wrong thing to do, or at least not to round it out. And I've been pushing off this. I know that I have to work on my alignment and posture, but I've been pushing it off and pushing it off and pushing it off. And when I finally met you and I said, this guy knows what he's talking about, and this is the way, this is my way out of this pushing off my alignment stuff, I'm going to jump on this. And so you've really kind of encouraged me to get out of it and do it now. Which leads me to my question. How old are your typical clients?
Well, from a business standpoint, we always look at that to see who our different clients are. But, I've worked on 2-year-olds, which is we have some stuff in the Pain Free for Women book in the back, like to do with your kids. I've worked on 105-year-olds, who are on a nasal cannula. They can't breathe without the oxygen hooked up, and they're all kyphotic and bent over. They have osteoporosis. And we give them a 5-degree to 10-degree improvement in their spinal position by staying away from the spine, by the way, and looking at the shoulder and the hip. And all of a sudden, they're off the nasal cannula because they can now trigger their diaphragm and their breathing capacity increase by 40%. So, all age groups. But in general, if you start thinking about what you just said, I'm in my 30s, I've weight trained, I've cumulative effect on top of this. It's starting to grab me. I'm starting to get worried about my compelling future, whether it's even compelling or not, because my body's not going to be able to keep up. And, that's the one reason why I named my Instagram the way that I did with my age in there and stuff like that, because I want people to try to keep up with me. And it's not about work out harder. It's just work out smarter, more efficient, activate the right muscles. So whether you're 50, whether you're 30, whether you're 20, and whether you're 70, let me just say this. You're not broken. Let me repeat that. You are not broken, no matter what allopathic medicine tells you, no matter what you heard about your shoulder flipping over the motorcycle and then hurting yourself later. Yes, I've had 2 ACL reconstructions. Yes, I've broken my fibula on my left leg, blood clotted my calf, hernia in my left hip, tore my labrum in my left hip, separated my left shoulder, herniated the disc in my neck, bulging disc in my lumbar spine, dislocated my right shoulder. Who cares? These are opportunities for me to get better as an athlete. And the stuff that I'm able to do in my 50s now, yeah, I expect to be doing the same thing in my 60s, even better, so that it is a motivator for people to go, I remember you 10 years ago when I saw you on stage at this event. I can't believe you're still going. And I'm like, you haven't seen anything. When I'm 70, it's even going to be better.
Yeah, that's great. One of the items in the book that struck me was Pete talking about the less we move, the less we are capable of moving. And research into aging is just now figuring this out, that if you don't use your body the way it's designed, you lose it. And then as you start to lose it, things start to get worse and you start to go down the rabbit hole till you eventually die an early death because of loss of function. And to top off the bad news, human beings are really bad at correlating events that are far from the cause. So the cause might have been I messed up my knee or my shoulder, and because of that, I started overcompensating, and then my primary muscle got weak, and therefore I didn't do that one movement or the exercise that I should have because I thought, oh, I don't want to injure myself, but that made it even worse. And so we're not realizing that we're made to move as a species, and lack of movement is contributing to a faster aging, which is what we don't want to do. We want to reverse that.
So let me ask you a question about this. Mm-hmm. What's the hottest word in the anti-aging world where everybody's trying to do what to their bodies?
Oh, everybody's trying to biohack their bodies.
Correct. Biohacking, if you had to define it for a listener like my kid who just said, well, Faraz, what's biohacking? Give me a simple 17-year-old description to my son. How would you say it?
Sure. I would say that it's finding ways of improving how your body functions, either through a supplement or through a food or through a timing of something or through the right exercise, so you gain an advantage over the average person, or you become a better version of yourself.
That's a perfect way to do it. You're looking to become a better version of yourself. And everybody would say, yes, that's what I want. Nobody says I want to get worse. Okay, great. All the time and the money spent on all of the biohacking, and I speak at these conferences and I love the guys who created these things. I will tell you, and this goes to everybody listening, you are absorbing about 50% of what you're trying to get at 100%, because the foundational movement pattern in your body is compromised. Meaning, in general, your posture sucks. And somebody will look in the mirror and go, well, my shoulders are here, and they're pulling them back. I'm not looking at your shoulders. We're looking at simple things you don't pay attention to. If your listener stands up, if they're at home, they stand up right now, they take their shoes off, and they close their eyes, and they feel where their body weight is, left to right, front to back. Where's the body weight? And if it's not level every day of your life, or if it's not level and you're not doing something to correct it, then you're already imbalanced. So when you go to the hyperbaric chamber, when you go to red light therapy, when you go to physical therapy, when you go to chiropractic, when you go to yoga, when you go to breathing, when you go to ice baths, all this stuff, and your head's forward and it's cocked off to one side and your knees pointed in toward the other, there are what we call air leaks in the system. So we're putting on a new coat of paint and going, look how amazing this new biohacked body is. And within an hour, you're dissipated in the effects. So we got to hack that belief system and just say, if you would just do a minimal dose of Egoscue every day, you do a maximal dose, you'll get maximal effect. So when somebody says, how many days a week do you do it? I tell them I do it 8 days a week. And they're like, wait, what? And I go, yeah, I got the state change out of you. That's right. I said 8 days a week. When would now be a good time to get started for you? And they're like, okay, let's start now. Let's do this now. Exactly. Because, we've got to get people to, and I love the biohacking idea. I really do. And I'm supportive of everybody who's doing it. My job is to give them better results so that they don't get frustrated at the biohacking and say the biohacking didn't work. That's not true. Your body didn't work. So we're going to give you the movement pattern to reverse that. Remember, Pete Egoscue, the godfather of posture, the godfather of functional movement, we were on a mission 30 years ago to create the whole belief system behind functional movement and postural conditioning, posture correction, corrective exercises. And now it's in the mainstream. Nothing makes us happier until I see people still training in parts by saying, you need to train your core when your hip flexor's off 24/7.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And so I've been around a lot of these biohacks myself, but the two foundational pieces, at least for me right now, I'm not looking at any biohacks until I fix these two. One is my musculoskeletal system, which I'm working with you on. And the second one is getting ample amounts of sleep. I realize I'm lacking in REM and deep sleep at the moment. And so I'm working on those two foundational things before I do any more supplement, before I turn on any more devices and measure anything more in my body. So I agree with you 100%. Let me ask you a question that a friend posed to me, and I know the answer, but I'd like you to address it. She got into a car accident and suffered from whiplash recently. She says she's been going to a physical therapist 2 or 3 times a week, and I asked for how long. She said many months. And so obviously you came to mind, but how is Egoscue different from going to see a physical therapist?
Great question. And I have a lot of friends who are physical therapists. I have a lot of friends who are chiros and osteos and all that. I was actually with Health South for years, and I was going to physical therapy school when I hooked up with Pete while I was in Florida. And to this day, my job and all of my therapist job across the world, our main message is this. Thank you, Pete Egoscue, who says this. Our job is to make your physical therapist job easier by giving that therapist a better aligned body so that you can help me with my other symptomatic areas. I can tell you this emphatically. Her whiplash, if they're looking at her neck, they're looking at the wrong place. If they're looking at the pelvis and the stability of the pelvis, which I'm sure, guaranteed, she has an imbalance from left to right. And you know what would be a cool thing? If she allows us to do a posture image evaluation of her, let us put it into the show notes. And I can't promise this, folks. We got to get the okay from her. We'll black out her face, whatever we have to do. But we'll look at the direction of her knees and the tilt of her pelvis and the spinal cord, spinal column angle, the natural S curve, where it isn't versus where it should be. And then we'll be able to at least say, if we're looking at this from the top down, remember, whiplash is a neck, shoulder, head symptom, just like a concussion, which is why the NFL is still scratching its head about concussions. If you don't start looking at the base of the spine and its support mechanism to the base of the brain, then you're never going to solve this concussion issue if you don't start looking at pelvic function.
You know, the more time I spend with you and with Egoscue, I start to believe that until you've got this base level figured out, you're right, we're wasting away so many resources. The Egoscue method teaches people to move their bodies the right way and therefore get rid of back pain or pain anywhere in their body. You're also going to provide some exercises so the listeners can get a feel for how easy Egoscue is.
If you want to fix this problem, then you got to move correctly. And the simple Egoscue exercises that we're going to provide to your listeners to try these out. Let me take you know what Yoda would say about trying. We're not going to ask them to try them. We're going to ask them to do them. And from doing them, they're going to realize how simple the fix is for this kind of stuff. And we have clinics all over the country and Skype therapy and digital therapy all over the world. They'll be able to ask us questions and have us take a look and do therapy with us. So there's never a no as it relates to can we help something. But sitting on a plane, sitting in a car, it's not going anywhere. In fact, when we come out with driverless cars, we're all going to be in the back working on our phones, which means we're going to be looking down even more. So why don't we just train the body to be rebound back to the correct position, and then none of those are symptomatic at all.
You mentioned to me that you help women lose weight from the waist down, and I think that one line just hooked any woman that's listened to this podcast. Would you elaborate more on that?
Well, you know it has to be right because it's, it's like us writing the Pain-Free book. I always joke with the Pain-Free for Women book being an amazing book about women written by 2 men. So, you know, that they always get a chuckle out of that. But I will tell you, the Pete Egoscue and Roger Gittins, who was the co-writer in that book with him and helped Pete put his words down on paper. Amazing ideas in there as it relates to childbirth and hormones and getting pregnant versus having trouble getting pregnant and internal environments, all that stuff. But when we talk about lymphatic flow and we talk about the lymph system in general, think about the word lymph, Lymphatic, lymphatic. The word fat is in there, but it's not spelled, quote, the bad way, F-A-T. It's spelled P-H-A-T. So the magazines are just BSing women left and right on a daily basis. And I was raised with 3 sisters. So it kind of pisses me off a little bit that they're being lied to by saying work out harder and eat less. I know so many women, especially the ones at Robbins events when we bring this up, because I get inundation of people coming up saying, let's talk about that specific subject. Can you eat less? No, I'm already eating pretty much nothing. Well, how's that working for you? Well, I gained 4 pounds over the last 2 months. How's that feel to you? That's horrible because I'm trying to go the other direction. Well, how's your movement? I work out 7 days a week. How's that working for you? Well, I ride the elliptical, I do this, and the elliptical should just be named Let's Make Your Butt Larger Machine, because it promotes no leg going behind you, which is the lack of hip extension or toe off when you're walking. It just puts people tighter in their hips, and then they sit more, and then they don't move more, and then you just become tighter, and then their emotions are tied to it, and they're just spinning their wheels, but yet the magazines say, keep working, honey, keep working, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you guys have got to be kidding me. There's nobody smarter. No, I'm not just saying this to get on the good side of my sisters, but there's nobody smarter in a relationship than a woman. They are great listeners. They trust their instincts. And if you're a dude, you better be listening to what I'm saying right now. So having said that, they're believing the hype around eat less and work out more. And I think that you and I need to help interrupt this right now by saying, if you work out more, you're actually going to be worse, because you're fatiguing the deep structural muscles that are meant to hold your body in a better position, mainly the psoas or the king. Once it fatigues, it becomes short, tight, weak, which is what Vladimir Yonda, one of my clients, would call it. Short, tight, weak is the unhappy triad. When a muscle does that, it becomes ischemic or noxious in its movement, and it almost like a beef jerky feel to it. And I'm not even talking the quality beef jerky. I'm talking the old school stuff that's like rubber and you can't bite it in half. You know, it's horrible. So in order to change this line of thinking around fat versus fat, FAT versus PHAT, this PHAT thing that Egoscue embraces is an idea of freeing up the lymphatic system to do its job, especially at the channel at the hip, by teaching the leg bone how to rotate in the hip joint, teaching the pelvis how to be the movement above that femur bone. And once that's reestablished by waking up the king, then everything starts to come into play.
Interesting. I definitely do believe in the power of the lymphatic system. I do rebounding exercises every morning, but I'm also happy that I'm working on these menus with you with the Egoscue, which will keep that lymphatic system flowing even better. How long do Egoscue exercises in general take every day?
Well, for me, for example, I've incorporated them into my workouts. So if, let's say today's a typical just weight training day, you know, I use a lot of band work. There's a couple guys out there with this thing called the X3 bar. And I like it because it's band work. It trains the muscle through a nice bell curve of strength instead of going, here's the most vulnerable point. And don't get me wrong, I love weight training too. In fact, I'm a huge fan of traditional weight training, which is why I'm a huge fan of CrossFit, having never been in one of those boxes. But I'm a huge fan of it because of the community that it built around weightlifting. But movement, as it relates to training this way, I've incorporated my functional movement into my workouts to be more efficient. But again, at night, I'll put on, you know, these bed reading glasses where I can watch some TV or lay down on my back and put my legs up over the block and static back and just let gravity help me out for the next 30 minutes where I feel like nothing's happening. But it is better than sitting on the couch doing nothing. So to answer your question, I could get away with 5 minutes. I could get away with an hour. You let me know what you want and we'll try to accommodate it.
Now, I wanted to ask you, let's say somebody's got pain in their shoulder and their knee because of an injury they've had or just because of lifestyle. How long does it typically take for that pain, and working with you guys, for that pain to go away?
Well, okay. I'm going to give you the gambit. I'm going to run the whole gambit on this. I've had people, not a joke. There's a picture that I use of a 58-year-old triathlon Kona Ironman who was in some pain. Metabolic system was shut down, wasn't getting the right effects on his hacking the way that he wanted, and he was running away from his personal best in his triathlons. And in 12 minutes of exercises over a 38-minute period of discussions going through his first appointment, his before and after pictures are unbelievable. That's 12 minutes. I have another picture of one of my favorite clients. Her name's Masa, out of our Tokyo clinic. And in 75 minutes of doing stuff with her where I had her on her back, this lady went from literally bent over as if you were pulling weeds in your garden to almost vertical at the age of 78, to a 12-year-old girl with scoliosis over a 2-week time period, making a 50 to 80% improvement in her scoliosis. And she did the work, a 12-year-old. And that's why I look at scoliosis as a gift, because she's the only 12-year-old that's taking care of her little body. Everybody else is letting theirs get worse over time, phones and backpacks and all that. So that's why scoliosis to her at that age was the interrupt that caused her to be more functional. So you can be out of pain in 5 minutes. Let's say we get an appointment done and you're going, wow, I feel so much better. An hour later, the pain comes back, just as much vengeance behind it. But we opened up a, what do we do? We opened up a window of function and living pain-free. Well, let's do that again tomorrow so that we can open up another window of living pain-free. Maybe it opens up for an hour and 20 minutes. And eventually, that's why I just have to keep educating our customer, not convincing our customer. It's educating them to realize that their body is not going to fail them.
Brian, you are 51. I didn't realize you were 51, by the way. You look great and you have great posture. But more importantly, what is the secret to your all-day energy, dude? Just keep going.
I know. Listen, I lost both of my parents in 2018, and I'm only telling you that because my mom
I'm sorry to hear that.
That's all right. They were awesome people, bro. My mom said to me, I was the kid that could never sit still. She said, you absolutely had ADHD before it was diagnosed. No question, you should have attention deficit disorder across your chest. But I will tell you that I channeled that through a couple of, quote, hacks. One of them was, which, you know, I'm a huge fan of bulletproof coffee. I'm a huge fan of it. Not because of any other reason than here's what it did for me. I could read a book 5 times and maybe memorize stuff to tell you what was in it. But if you came back to me a year later and said, what was in that book? I'd go, well, I know it was about this. And I went from reading, say, 10 books in my life to 22 books in a year. But reading those books, if I had to read these before my brain learned how to use fat as energy, and my whole body hormonally corrected itself, I will tell you, I was just living on a pancreatic reaction every morning. Oatmeal, bread, and all that kind of stuff. And I was still pretty healthy. That mixed with doing my exercises every day, I will tell you, I do something from Egoscue every day, and it's been cumulative for the last 25 years. I will tell you that is absolutely number one. Because every other hack that I did around that, like today for lunch, I went and had kale, spinach, celery, cucumber, carrots, apple, ginger, turmeric, lemon juice, all juiced through a cold press. And I chugged 22 ounces of it. That's what I did for lunch.
That's yummy, dude.
It's so yummy, right? But tonight I'm having grass-fed lamb with some basmati rice, and tomorrow I'm having some pizza. So look, you got to realize that all these little things you put in your body, if you don't believe that they're going to be healthy for you, I didn't make this up, but your internal hormone reaction creates a belief system and a reaction systemically, whether you are going to get a positive or a negative out of that. So my whole outlook is cathartically waking up and literally, here's my 4 minutes, my coffee's in the press. I've always had this type of energy, but really what the coffee did is it calmed me down.
Because of the fat.
Because of the fat.
I typically do an intermittent fast for 16 hours a day, so I don't get to enjoy the fat in my coffee, but I do drink black coffee. What you did mention just a second ago, it really struck something. You know, when you start going down this health journey and you think, well, I've got to eat organic everything, and it's got to be grass-fed, and it's got to be this and that. But after a point, you realize that you're just stressing yourself out because that's all you think about when you think about food. And so what I've come to now is the point you made about eating pizza. Well, if I'm not in a place where I have organic food or I'm eating street tacos once in a while, then all I do is I just bless the food before I eat it. I know that I tell the food, you're going to do amazing things in my body. You're going to heal me, not hurt me. And just that shift stops stressing me out about the food that I ate for hours and hours. I definitely get inspired every time I hang out with you because you call me out on my bullshit and you help me see the bigger picture, which now I've finally seen it and I'm all in on this stuff. So thank you for that. Now, where can people find you and the Egoscue method online?
Multiple ways. Egoscue.com is probably one of the best ways, EGOSCUE.com. I'm also going to give you an active URL that'll take them to a landing page where they're going to be able to get some exercises that we talked about on this podcast. And I would expect them to go there and give us their feedback. Do they like them? Do they not like them? It'll take them about, 3 to 5 minutes to get these things done. And if that's all they do for us and they don't want to spend $1 with us ever, I'm fine with that. Just talk about Egoscue and share it with your friends. But I'm also going to give them ways where they can get in touch with us via the digital therapy options, because a lot of people listening to this have their own special cases going on and they want to go deeper, as you did, into the therapy process. And I don't know what you can tell them about the therapy process, but I'll let you give them a quick idea of why it's worth it or why it's not worth it.
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth it. This was a huge blind spot for me. As I told you, I've been pushing aside my musculoskeletal integrity for many years and accumulating injuries, I would say for the past even 15, 17 years when I had that first accident on the motorbike. And pushing that away means I was being compromised in the way I lifted my weights and the way I did shoulder press at the gym. And therefore, I wasn't walking right, I wasn't standing right, I was hunching forward. And now what I've learned is it's a simple shift. Once I start to get this and I start to get my body back in alignment, I just walk around feeling like the man. And I'm telling you this, like my shoulders are pulled back, I'm walking, my chest is out, and I just feel like a different man. And there's more energy around me. I don't know why. I've never had problems with energy, but I just feel even more energetic, which is surprising. And so it's been very beneficial for me, and I see how what I've been doing for the last 15, 20 years could cause real issues, because now I'm starting to feel some pain in my shoulders. And so I want to nip this in the bud immediately and fix my structure so that I can live a long life. And I encourage all my listeners to do the same.
Well, yeah, any way we can help out via the pain-free book or anything like that. But if you can, in the notes or even on the screen or anything you want to give them, I can tell you egoscue.com/ I know we talked about anti-aging. What do you want this URL to be? You tell, what do you want the back end of it to be? And we'll just make it right now.
Okay, so let's do egoscue.com / anti-aging hacks.
Perfect. egoscue.com / anti-aging hacks. And I'm telling you, it's going to change. It's going to change their lives.
Sweet. And thank you again so much, Brian, for coming on the show. And I expect to have you back, I'm sure, in not too distant future.
It's my pleasure. You let me know how I can help out.
Well, that's it for today, folks. I highly recommend you go to egoscue.com / anti-aging hacks and check it out. And feel free to ask any questions. Brian's a great guy and he'll get back to you quickly. You can find all the information we discussed in this episode and links to studies in the show notes at antiaginghacks.net. To make sure you get notified of new episodes, please subscribe to the podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at antiaginghacks and on Facebook at facebook.com / antiaginghacks. And now for the disclaimers. This podcast is for general information purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. Please seek the advice of your health professional for any health or medical conditions.